Let's go ahead and get started. So again, this is based on these conversations that Julie moderated. What capabilities and features do the proving grounds need to possess? What do facility owners need to know, or wherever your conversations went? Let's go ahead and, from what I've seen, they went everywhere, which is fantastic, which is why we're having this. So whoever's online virtually, perhaps one of you can step up. How does this work? Room number one.
Kristen and Danielle, I think we're room one.
Yeah, thanks. So Kristen and I were facilitating room number one online. So our conversation had a lot to do with international cooperation mainly, and how do we get international partners to collaborate, and how do we get all of the data that we're taking from Lunar Proving Grounds to everyone else. We also talked about requirements and repeatability, so a lot to do with like scientific goals of how can we repeat experiments, and let Kristen take the next two.
All right, so this is Kristen. Another thing we heard about was, what are the requirements for the testing facility? What does that mean? Like, do they become certified? How does your technology become certified to be ready? In terms of access to facilities, we also talked about how can you divide them up by perhaps TRL level. If you have a certain TRL level, you're kind of funneled into one facility. And as you progress, you can move to more advanced facilities. And there were lots of conversations about costs too. How much is it going to cost to use a facility? But there was also some questions about how much does it cost to build these facilities, and who's going to foot that cost.
You're doing a great job moderating, Danielle. All right, give Danielle an applause for moderating. All right, so good job. All right, are we on group 3 now? Was that 1 and 2 we've heard from? Or was that just 1 still? Okay, number 2.
Hi there. This is Andrew. Andrew and Sean. We moderated group 2 here, room 2. Sorry. And what we have on the screen now is our main takeaways from the discussions there. I'll focus on the lights on the left there. So we had a lot of discussion about the international collaboration, right? And it was already touched upon, right? But that is going to be a challenge in terms of both countries, commercial, private organizations, and government agencies. So how to actually do that in terms of the open discussions necessary to utilize these facilities. And the schedule, right? And the scheduling the facilities is going to be a huge challenge. Along with fidelity, right? Fidelity we've heard multiple times today in different discussions, but the fidelity in terms of the testing and what is needed with each individual LPGs and where those are located across the globe. So, Sean?
Yeah, so we also talked quite a bit about how to protect each individual company's IP and respect ITAR regulations when you have multiple organizations testing at the same facility at once. If you have that capability, we talked a bit about building a bit about a bit off of what was talked about in the panel about splitting off facilities into sort of TRL binned groups. There was a bit of discussion about how the V&V matrix that Rob talked about would actually be defined, and who would actually be in charge of defining that, whether that would be more of a NASA-led effort or more of an industry led. There was a desire to standardize the proving grounds for not just a technology destined for the moon, but also some other capabilities. And then ways to do things across different LPGs, coordinate, and that kind of stuff. And that's it from us.
Is it working now? There we go. All right, fantastic. That's what I was looking at, you guys. Is it working? You guys, oh, yeah. So thank you, Sean, for that summary. Now let's move on to number 3.
Yeah, this is Jorge. I think we, Michael Nord and I were co-facilitators for number 3. And yeah, so I'm kind of sharing here. So one of the things that kind of, stood out in terms of some of the discussions, right, in terms of capabilities, right, is that, for example, right, it's trying to have some kind of standardization or being able to, because if you're going from one facility to another, right, you want to be able to have some commonalities in terms of capabilities, and especially as you're adding another variable, right, you don't want to have all the variables different, right, as you go from one facility to the next. And so being able to have some way to be able to kind of have some kind of standardization, right, or some kind of sort of requirements where things are kind of similar, so that when you go from one facility to the next, right, that and you're adding this additional sort of challenge or requirement to your capabilities, right, that it's not, you can still you can see the difference by adding this other capability instead of just starting anew, right, and not being able to do sort of at least somewhat apples to apples kind of comparison. Another thing is that related to that, right, is that maybe bringing either sort of some of these capabilities together under one roof, right, or having some kind of consortium, right, that is able to help standardize or at least help sort of define sort of, okay, these are what these different sets of capabilities are, right? And of course, you can be having some of these thematic capabilities, right? Whether it's topography, regolith, right? Sort of like power, comms, right? Those are ones that are sort of work really nicely together. And then of course, some of these, there was some really great discussion in terms of some of the other challenges, right, is being able to work with the local governments, right, and permitting process, right. And so it's, especially with some of these facilities, right, where they're kind of remote and you got to be able to get buy-in from the local community. And so it's whether being able to have ability to either do outreach or have some form that allows you to, whether it's having a letter of support from NASA, right, to show that, hey, this is what this is being used for, or in terms of getting approval to be able to do the type of testing that you need to do with some of these facilities. Michael, do you have anything else you want to add to this? I don't know if I see Michael on. Michael Nord.
I think that was a great summary, Jorge. Thank you so much.
All right, sounds good.
Both you and Michael. So moving on to the number 4. Thank you, Danielle, for that solo reminder.
Yes, number 4 was Brenda and I can go ahead and screen share real quick. We had a lot of really great thoughts. I've distilled some of them in our likes and wonders, although all of them are sort of works in progress. A common theme that came up again and again was this concept of locality, scale, and fidelity being these 3 major factors in regards to building out LPGs. There is definitely a strong consensus for having overlap or redundancy or a wide availability of capabilities as opposed to having highly niche capabilities at an LPG and having a facility only do one thing really, really well, but having multiple facilities that could be options for your capability at different levels of fidelity. Risk profile in terms of collaboration was a huge one. What are acceptable risks? How do we, manage risks or, foresee risks for both providers and users? How does IP sharing work when we're trying to navigate that, especially in regards to what are you planning to test? What activities are you planning to do? How do we navigate the IP landscape across different stakeholders? There was collaboration from facilities, not only physical facilities, but the ability to link up remotely, to have virtual missions together that have an end-to-end ConOps that you test out in virtual environments. Reporting on failures being just as important as reporting on successes. Of course, it makes sense to have headlines of when things go really well, but what about when there's downtime, or what about when there's a really great lesson learned? How do we also share out about those as well to share within the community? Brenda had some really great insights about schedule slip and integrated schedules, as well as testing technologies at different TRL levels at the same time. Do you want to share anything about that, Brenda? She might also be away from her computer at the moment. If not, I could step in. The idea here being, whether it's due to weather or, travel, or if one stakeholder is unavailable, how do you navigate testing simultaneously when one stakeholder suddenly becomes unavailable, or a technology or a facility becomes unavailable all of a sudden? How does that downstream impact all the other stakeholders involved?
Yeah, the other part of that too is the risks and the cost that incurs when somebody doesn't make their deadline and it throws all the schedules off. Who has to absorb all those costs, and how do you deal with those interdependencies?
Sure. And some other thoughts on things that people are wondering about: permits for natural environments, so preserving the environment, environmental health and safety in the environment they are operating in.
What? No, I didn't cut her off. So
not only the car, every few months, and there's lots of travel costs associated. Oh no! Can you all?
you're kind of cutting out a little bit,
Right.
Sarah.
Oh no! Oh no! All right, I'll just repeat the last little bit. Preserving your natural environment, safety, and proper, not only the cost of using a facility, but the associated costs of, let's say, travel, depending on your frequency and duration of use. Maybe the travel costs really add up, and that influences your decision more so than the actual facility itself. Access to facilities, who has access, for how long do you have access, what information is required, what credentials are required. Also talk about emergency preparedness from the perspective of, if there's not only, just a health crisis that someone is having, but let's say there's damage incurred to a device that's in testing, there's, a battery is leaking, or there's metal components or shards, or, hazards that are created in the process of testing. How do we look out for those? How do we protect the people that are utilizing these facilities for various cases? And what does emergency response look like at what might be a remote site for an LPG? So those are some of the many wonderful things that we talked about in room 4.
Very nice. Thank you, Sarah and Brenda. Very thorough. Now we have moved to number 5, last of the, I think we're 5 virtual ones. One more.
Yes. So this is from room 5. Laura and I moderated the room 5 breakout session. So regarding main takeaways in regard to challenges, scale, cost, and coordination efforts, we thought are the main challenges. Regarding hurdles, creating dusty environment for a prolonged period of time is a hurdle that needs to be overcome, and access and communication, needless to mention. And we thought that collaboration between facilities is very important, and for that, maybe create an oversight entity, kind of a public-private cooperated, jointly operated entity, and maybe a centralized kind of a yellow pages of all the facilities, so that different facilities, different LPGs can collaborate each other seamlessly. Some overlap incapabilities between different LPGs or different facilities is desirable. Redundancy is always important. Of course, this has to be balanced out by cost considerations. And as far as how to approach the fact that different facilities or different groups may have different approach towards testing, standardization, etc., it would be advisable to look at how different professional societies they work together, or how to look at how different militaries of different nations they work together in different alliances like NATO, and how they overcome this kind of hurdles. So as far as things the group thought could have been discussed or would have been nice to discuss is one thing is the general question of what is holding the progress up. Why are we not getting started as soon as possible? So what are the main holdups? The question of simulant is always there. Availability and use of large-scale simulants for realistic testing, and other non-physical aspects like funding, programmatic aspects. How can we kind of implement a public-private partnership to do this? Those are the things this workshop or a future workshop should discuss. Anything else you want to add? Oh, okay. Over.
Any more to add, or was that it?
That is it.
Tony, thank you very much. That's fantastic. Now we can move on to our in-house or breakout sessions that were in the dining area. So table number 1. So I'll just hand you the microphone, or do you? Okay, audience mic should be on. Anybody who was in charge just have to go to the mics. Yeah. I don't know if they all remember. Anybody remember your table numbers? You were one. Okay, here you go.
My table was the best. Okay. Biggest challenges for an LPG. Environmental fidelity was a big topic, and tech maturity of the system to qualify for an LPG test. So the entry criteria, how do we define that? Certification of LPG, which was also in another team that I heard. System functions, so a rover versus an optical sensor, they will have different needs. So how does the LPG account for that? And human activity interaction with the unit under test. How do we create an LPG that can accommodate both? Often encountered hurdles: schedule, cost, availability, SME resources, and IP protection. Facility coordination, public and accessible live test status for system and tag-along requests opportunity, sharing test procedures and test results, and test preparation documentation for users. So there's not a lot of downtime as if somebody goes in and wants to test their hardware. Capability overlap, duplication and overlap to enable availability, so several systems that can do the same stuff. But we want to be careful with the all-inclusive package of the systems, because that would increase a lot the cost, and some systems won't demand all environments to be tested at the same time. And then facility management, it would be desirable to have test standards, output standards, requirements for use, so not flight grade, but at least not radioactive, or have some safety reviews for them. System history report would be good, so you understand what is coming in, and a review committee that is comprised of SMEs and techs. That also includes a little bit of policy and regulation. Likes, they loved their facilitator. My table had really civic conversations. Idea of sharing information was very popular, and leveraging existing capabilities with the future LPG. We still wonder, or at least I do, but they also put it in, so that's okay. LPG, is it one facility or is it multiple facilities? What is the scope and the scale? What is the business model, the commercialization of an LPG? What in the world will the coordination between the facilities is going to look like? And what is the required proof standard for the Lunar Proving Ground? Thank you.
That was awesome, a lot of fun, thank you. Number 2, table 2. Okay.
I think we didn't have a moderator, but.
That's right. The table I tried to join that said they didn't need me.
That was a mistake, but so our table talked about a lot of things, but we, I think, really focused on what do we expect to get out of Lunar Proving Ground. There was some discussion on semantics. Can we call anything on Earth a Lunar Proving Ground? We decided for the moment that we'll accept that as a definition. But how does that distinguish itself from more traditional test facilities, environmental chambers, and so on? And I think where our conversation started going is that it depends a lot on exactly what the mission is, what the objective of the system under test is, and that started to identify with question number 4, I think it was, the thematic capabilities, that Lunar Proving Ground should have some theme, that they're designed to address some subset of systems, that they are large enough that they can work with systems of systems, looking at different interactions, and that they expose the system to different environmental conditions simultaneously. And that's going to be how it distinguishes itself from more traditional test chambers. In terms of challenges, availability was a challenge. So we were talking about how multiple facilities need to be available, that if people are waiting years to be able to access one of these facilities, that they have very limited value. That there has to be collaboration between different types of thematic facilities so that whatever instrument under test is can be exposed to as many conditions as possible and ensure success when it actually goes up to the moon. And those are our main takeaways. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you much. Thank you, I think I'm 3. You're 3.
I'll just say I'm 3. I'm Tim, I'm representing table number 3. Sorry, Melena, my table was the best. So, like others, we talked about whether more than one proving ground is needed. We certainly think that we can't make one proving ground that does everything for all people, all subsystems. We talked about if these different proving grounds are for different TRL levels. Would you take a TRL level 2 and try to get it to 3 at one proving ground? Later on, when it's 6 or 7, you go to the more sophisticated, expensive facility. We also talked about we can never build a perfect lunar proving ground. I mean, many of these missions are going to the polar regions of the moon. How do we even know what the rocks are like there, the rocks and the dust? So we're missing some data. We're gonna have to extrapolate some to get confidence that we can operate successfully in the lunar areas. But it'll also be good as we build these LPGs that we think about flexibility of the proving grounds versus fidelity. If we try to build the perfect lunar proving ground, I mean, does that include G-negation? Does that include lighting? Does that include, just regolith? So there's so many variables, it's going to be next to impossible to build a perfect lunar proving ground. We have to figure out what's good enough, when to stop sharpening the pencil. So again, flexibility versus fidelity. Modularity of a proving ground. If we're testing rovers or manned operations, maybe we have a certain setup, certain situation for that proving ground, and then we got swap out for some rigid structures or habitats. We talked about designating different proving grounds for different subsystems. Maybe all the power subsystems go to a certain proving ground, comm systems go to another, structure go to another. We also talked about potential problems with data and pipeline, clogging the pipeline. Are we going to be able to use this proving ground to prove that all the data coming up from the various robots, the various systems, the various nationalities that are all on the moon at the same time? Are we going to have a traffic jam of communications? So do we need to be able to test a system of landers and rovers and robots all at the same time? Thanks.
All right. Hi, my name is Bob Esser, table 4, also the best table. So I'll just kind of walk through the questions as we encountered them. The biggest challenge that we kind of discussed was to do with requirements. Who sets the requirements? Who meets the requirements? What constitutes a pass and what constitutes a fail? So that was sort of a big unanswered question. What are the requirements? Where do they come from? Regarding hurdles and things of that nature, the biggest one we saw was scheduling and availability of the test facilities. I guess taking a step or two back, we at our table sort of envisioned the Lunar Proving Ground being a lot of different facilities, a lot of different functions at different facilities. So we can move then on to question 3, the collaboration between facilities. We would imagine there will be overlap and duplication of capabilities with some testing needs that need to be represented in a lot of different places and have a lot of different uses, but there will be other testing facilities that would be relatively unique. Regarding themes and sort of thematic facilities, we leaned more towards functional themes, testing in vacuum, testing spacesuits would be typical themes, rather than like regional themes where you would test high latitudes versus low latitudes. Testing standardization. So we imagine, you know, some of these facilities would be commercial, some of these would be public, some would probably be some cooperation between the two. At a commercial facility, you bring them your test plan, they execute your test plan, they tell you the results, we're done here. At a public facility, they're probably going to have their own test examples. They're going to have their test requirements, and that will be defined at the facility rather than defined as a negotiation between two commercial entities. So the testing standardization, what are the expectations? What are the interfaces? Who determines what order the test happens? Those sorts of things we saw as things that would need to be negotiated out in the standardization realm. And then the last note was who pays for it all? Who's going to pay for the testing? Who's going to pay for the facilities? How's that going to work? So that's basically what we got.
Thanks, Bob. Nice summary. How many more do we have? Are there 10? Okay.
So I'm fine. All right. So I'll try to get us back on track. A lot of great stuff has been said. So I had the pleasure of working with Table 5. By the way, I'm James Ostandra, APL. There was a lot of good discussion on coordination, leveraging some of the facilities that are already being built here on Earth. And then once you get more mission requirements, using those to kind of find gaps to see how you can address those on Earth. A lot of great discussion as well on not underestimating the power of a lunar proving ground on the moon if you needed to test various different variables amongst high fidelity. And if launch costs continue to be driven down, you could imagine actually just flying it to the moon and testing, right? You could have, obviously, in some cases, various sets of do no harm to the launch vehicle, to the operators, to various different equipment on the moon, but you could imagine that once you have those tests done, that you could actually start doing more tests on the lunar surface. Large discussion again on money, right? Who's gonna pay for this? How is that gonna work? If you did have a lunar proving ground on the moon, right, you would have, you know, what infrastructure would be there? What infrastructure could you count on? How would that be developed? And then we ended on a good discussion about, you know, can we enable more coordination amongst industry and academia in trying to develop some of this technology, especially if there are lower barriers to technology development and testing. Oh, it also was the best table. Yeah, I think we're tied. Everyone, I think there's 15 best tables. So
thanks, James.
Yeah.
Okay, number 6.
Here, does this work? Yeah. Okay, number 6, the bestest table. Okay, so for likes, we like the discussion of near-term versus long-term needs. What do we need now? What can be done in 5-10 years? And with that was a wonder, because of the diversity of tech, the needs will be quite different. So how do we hit the right boxes? For both like and wonder, we had access to facility, which has come up several times. And with that came a little bit of a discussion on priority and who gets to set priority if there's competing needs. So who owns this facility might drive that. So that's something to watch. We talked standardization as well. We also talked standardization in terms of having standard infrastructure to tie into. So if you're not a power system, we have a standard power system for you to come into, and everybody does apples to apples against that. Same with COM or a mobility platform or whatever. Also, likes, we talked about having a controlled, repeatable environment as being the key factor. By controlled, not security, but controlled environmental. And then for wonders, the long-term maintenance and management, how that's handled and the cost of that. And then the question of size, we've talked everything from kilometers to test terrain. Do we really need that big? If we're talking about a simulant bin, how big do we really need this to test what we need to test? That's it.
Matt, table 7, best table. Few main takeaways from our group. Thank you. So you can't have it all. Want to test for large scale, lose fidelity. Want smaller scale, okay, you can go high fidelity. We need to consider analysis in all of this. Where can we buy down risk, figure out where, parameter space that we don't need to probe with analysis. For, new people coming into the community, figuring out how do they test their technology. Best way to do that, pairing an experienced researcher with said new company to define and develop their test matrix, figure out what it is that they need to do. Ensuring that we have transparency and communication about Lunar Proving Ground capabilities in one common location, facilities webpage, whatever it may be, but one-stop shop for what's out there, what you need. And then lastly, to question number 4, we wanted to point out that this is the one about, should we try and have common capabilities for each different test facility? We have to leverage the facilities we have. We can't mandate top-down right now in the current funding situation. All these facilities are going to be built, and this one's going to do this, and that one's going to do that. We got to work with what we have, and so we got to get creative. And that's all for table 7, best table.
And I'm Jim Riley with Table 8, and just to shut the door on this best table thing, we're the best table in the universe. All right, so a lot of the things that we talked about in some detail, we've actually gone over, so I'm going to skip over a lot of that stuff. But the challenge overall is that we really only have one big integrated lunar proving ground, and that's 240,000 miles away. So that makes a little bit of a supply chain issue. What we do have here on the ground, though, is lots of facilities that are capable, but they're oftentimes focused on very narrow conditions. So we have the same challenge that a number of other tables mentioned, and that is we'll obviously have gaps between the capabilities in some of these test environments, and we'll also have overlaps. So one of the first things that's going to have to take place, and LSIC is already doing this to some degree, is catalog all these facilities and their capabilities. And then the second is, how well do they calibrate and validate across this universe of capabilities that these various facilities can bring? Then the second challenge to that is, how do we as the operators employ those test facilities to get us to the various LPGs we need? Because it's going to have to be essentially a plug and play, almost a custom capability that operates across the environment, depending on what part of the LPG, the big LPG, you want to mimic and use for test and evaluation or V&V. And so there's going to have to be two things. One, an integration across all those, and then standards. And somebody else brought that up as well, and that's a pretty big one. And then another comment that came up in the other tables as well that we talked about and for some time was scheduling coordination. How do you do that? Particularly when we start crossing international boundaries with facilities across the planet here. And so then we got to talking about a business case. How do you do that? And so that became more of a focus in our team. And we were looking at how would we structure an agreement, because it's very difficult, say, for NASA to contract directly to, say, 15 different subs without some sort of performance agreement that operates within industry and academia alike, as well as government labs and elsewhere. And so we ended up talking about how it might exist in terms of what might look like a master service agreement with task orders, or it's more familiar in the contracting environment in the business world, and that's the IDIQ contracts with a bunch of subs underneath it. And then how do you put that structure together so that you can now plug and play the elements within these different facilities to get you to derive the LPG that you want or need for the focus area that you're working on. And then finally, I just wanted to focus at whatever LPG that we end up with, we need to be looking at that LPG to lead us to the MPG. This is what we're looking for in the end. Thanks.
Table 9.
Work, go ahead.
Yeah, Bill Hara from Table 9, the best table in the multiverse. So we had a lot of good discussion. One of the things we talked about from the LPG challenge is an operation that's probably going to see a lot more use on the moon is human-machine teaming. So how do you accommodate that in an LPG? How do you test not only the machine, but also test the human and evaluate the teaming between the two is going to be a new challenge for LPGs. The next one thought we had was, could a website like techport.nasa.gov, which helps people marry potential funding sources to their needs, could a version of that be used in this situation to help the community get married up to applicable LPGs? So you can go through a pick list of criterias and it out pops, these are the 3 LPGs that are applicable for your need. That might be helpful for the community and for the LPGs. Bottlenecks, obviously we talked cost and access comes up a lot, but some specialty testing like radiation testing, radiation environment testing, especially to support accelerated lifetime testing, that is more specialized and could become a real bottleneck for LPGs and for hardware developers to get their hardware tested. And lastly, could we create a large-scale digital simulation environment to accommodate testing similar to what is used in the DoD world, and even a large-scale digital simulation environment that can even take hardware in the loop? Might be a capability to explore to really expand the space here so that we can eliminate some of the bottlenecks with the hardware facilities. And that was it.
Hi, number 10, and as the saying goes, you always save the best for last. I'm going to make this brief, but what our conversation was essentially about was that the breadth of what is needed for a lunar proving ground is just not going to be attainable. We're not going to have like a PSR temperature regulated facility the size of this room, or one that's vacuum sealed or has dust and that can get dirty. And so the biggest thing that we need to ask ourselves is like, what risks are we willing to take and what risks are going to be the ones that are going to be the most important in building these facilities and in choosing like a lunar proving grounds. And let's see, other notes. And then we're also missing like cross intersections. I think that's going to be the biggest focus in, I guess, consumers or customers like in looking for lunar proving grounds is what risks, like for example, the glare and dust, or how things are connected via dust and vacuum environment. So like that cross intersection is something that is going to be needed. And that is kind of the crux of what we discussed.
All right, fantastic. We are running way behind, but that's because there's so much for you guys to talk about. So thank you so much. So I'll give like a 30-second summary of what I think we heard, and it will not do anybody justice, but that's fine. So most of your discussions were, there are a lot of overlap in terms of how to use operations, logistics, regulations, access, things of that nature, how to use these facilities. Really a lot of discussions focused on. That's very, very important. Some discussions, but not as many, focused on very specific things that were needed. And tomorrow, you're going to be able to get to focus on that even more, get a little bit more specific. And finally, requirements appears to be a theme to many of them, like a need for requirements so you can understand what these capabilities are needed for these proving grounds. Requirements, mission requirements to to any other kind of requirements. So, all right, a few common themes. Need requirements. To some extent, we get to define the requirements ourselves for these facilities. So think outside the box, take the initiative, and say, hey, this should be a requirement, and you get to do this tomorrow as well. So leverage everything you heard about today. And I don't want to steal thunder from Jody, but we're finishing up. And off to Jody now to close it out.
Okay, well, I don't have much more to say other than that. I think that was a perfect wrap up. I think a lot of these conversations are going to be explored in a lot more detail tomorrow. So I'll just real quickly say, first of all, thank you all so much for an incredible day. I think we had really incredible speakers on the panels. We had a great keynote, and then I think the open discussion went really well, and there was a lot of incredible conversations and takeaways and potential recommendations and next steps and just things that we need to start doing now that we understand the gaps and understand kind of where we're at in terms of defining or identifying or in some way understanding what this LPG or LPGs need to look like. So day 2 is going to be, let's see, we're going to dive straight into the panel. So again, things are going to start around 10. There's going to be coffee and light snacks, light breakfast items, and networking. So that'll be in the dining area there. And then starting at 10:30, we'll kind of hit the ground running again. So 10:35, we've got a panel. That's going to be what are the attributes of being able to work with other hardware providers. So for example, legal agreements, interfaces and integration, things like that. So that's going to get into those nitty-gritty details of logistically, how do we actually do this? And then we'll head off to kind of an early lunch and then followed up with the open discussion 2, which is going to be inspired by that panel. So this is, given those attributes that we talked about during the panel, what are the logistical characteristics that technology developers, such as yourselves, desire in an LPG? And then, finishing things up with an hour. And I know that seems like a lot, but things have been going by fast today. So I'm sure that tomorrow is going to be the same. But anyway, then we'll have an hour of these takeaways and next steps. And so that's when Dave Smith and Jibu Abraham are going to kind of get into, let's summarize everything that we've talked about and let's figure out what we're going to do about it. So I believe that's everything I wanted to say. I think there are food options. So the lunch options that's in your little program apply for dinner as well, specifically the Star 2 that you see here. So things like La Palapa 2, which is Mexican food. There's also Cloby's Smokehouse, which is like barbecue. And Facci's is Italian. So depending on what you're interested in, things are right nearby. Wes, do you have anything you want to say? Yeah. Alrighty. Break. All right. Thanks, everyone. We will see you tomorrow.